Okay, guys, ready na, reporter? Okay, so since it's already on our screen reporting, so shall we start? Guys, Lina?
Okay, sir. Good morning, everyone.
Okay.
We are group three, and our report about is all about comparison and selection among alternatives. So, next slide, please. So, introduction. So, most engineering projects can be accomplished by more than one feasible design alternative, and the selection of one of these alternatives excludes the choice of any others. The alternatives are called mutually exclusive. Typically, the alternatives being considered require the investment of different amounts of capital, and their annual revenues and costs may vary. Sometimes the alternatives may have different useful lives. The fundamental question is, do the added benefits from the more expensive alternative bring more positive return relative to the added cost? So, ang report is all about kanang alternatives kay unsa ang kanang nindot pilion nga dako kag mabalik nga kwarta na dako kag magahin or dako kag mga benefits. So, mo to siya. So, next slide please. So, basic concepts for comparing alternatives. So, next slide please. So, Principle 1, Chapter 1 emphasizes the choice decision is among alternatives. So, such choice must incorporate the fundamental purpose of the capital investment, namely to obtain the at least minimum attractive rate of return or MARR for each dollar invested. So, in practice, there are usually a limited number of acceptable alternatives to consider for an engineering project. The problem of deciding which mutually exclusive alternative should be selected is made easier if we adopt the rule based on Principle 2, which Principle 2 in Chapter 1, which is the alternative that requires the minimum investment of capital and produces satisfactory functional results will be chosen unless the incremental capital associated with an alternative having a larger investment can be justified with respect to its incremental benefits. So under this rule, we consider the acceptable alternative that requires the least investments of capital to be the base alternative. So the investment of additional capital over that required by the base alternative usually results in increased capacity, increased quality, increased revenue, decreased operating expenses, or increased life. Therefore, before we before additional money is invested, it must be shown that each avoidable increment of capital can pay its own way relative to the other available investment opportunities. So in summary, if the benefits obtained by investing additional capital are better than those that could be obtained from investment of the same capital in the company at the MAR, investment should be made. So here explain na siya nga kuan nga kanang explain siya nga if mo invest ka kay adto ka sa kanang gamay ra kag magasto. Pero pwede sa dako kang magasto basta justified ang kanang iyang benefits. Simple mo pa ka kanang PC okay ra kanang adto kas malon sa indot og spec. So more na drug explain. So next slide please. So investment and cost alternative. So this basic policy for comparison of mutually exclusive alternatives can be demonstrated with two examples. So the first example involves investment project situation. Alternatives A and B are mutually exclusive investment alternatives with the estimated net cash flows as shown. Investment alternatives are those with initial or front-end capital investments that produce positive cash flows from the increased revenue, saving savings to reduce costs or both. The useful life of each alternative in this example is 4 years. So, muna siya example. So, next slide please. So, there, makita ninyo, muna siya ang example to. So, the cash flow diagrams for alternative A and B and for the year-by-year difference between them. These diagrams typify those for investment project alternatives. In this example, at minimum attractive rate of return with 10% per year, the present worth values are mga dissolve na. So, since the present worth value of alternative A is greater than zero at interest of minimum attractive rate, alternative A is the base alternative and will be selected unless additional incremental capital associated with alternative B is justified. So in this case, alternative B is preferred to our person or value. So hence, conclude the extra benefits obtained by investment of additional 13,000 capital in alternative B is justified. So there, explain na nila nga mga example dira sa ana alternative A, alternative B nga kay paano siya 73,000 nga dira to 10k. So mas dako ang nabayaran sa alternative B. So ang base alternative kay mao tong basta gamay kang nabayaran mo na siya nga. Sa alternative B kay dako kang mabayaran kaysa sa alternative A kay 30 may bayad pag extra 13k dira nga. Ila tong i-calculate nila mga ano mo if dako kang babayaran sa mga percent or value alternative A equals to 9,738 while sa percent or value sa kuan alternative B na span of 4 years kay 10,131 ya. Kung imo na nga minus kay mas dako ang madawatan sa alternative B in the end of 4 years kay 4 years to ang kanang problem na to. So makakuha kag extra $393 if mo invest ka sa alternative B. So why not? So next slide please. The second example involves a cost project situation. Alternative C and D are two mutually exclusive cost alternatives with estimated net cash flows as shown over a 3-year life. Cost alternatives are those with all negative cash flows except for the positive cash flows element from disposal of assets at the end of the project's useful life. This situation occurs when the organization must take some action and the decision involves the economical way of doing it. Example, the addition of environmental control capability to meet the new regulatory requirements. So it is also occurs when the expected revenues for the same are the same for each alternative. So ano siya? Second example. So next slide please. So there kita niyo ang cash flow diagram sa table. So ito ang basahan. So cash flow diagrams for alternative C and D and by the year by year difference between them are shown. These diagrams typify those for cost project alternatives. In this must take action situation, alternative C, which has lesser capital investment, is automatically the base alternative and would be selected unless the additional incremental capital associated with alternative B without 35k more is justified. With a greater capital investment, alternative D in this illustration has a smaller annual expense. Otherwise, it would not be feasible alternative. It would not be logical to invest more capital in an alternative without obtaining additional revenues or savings. So note that difference between two feasible cost alternatives is an investment alternative. So in this example, at a minimum attractive rate of 10% per year, they resolve. So alternative D is referred to alternative C because it has less negative present worth value. Hence, the lower annual expense obtained by investing additional 35,000 capital. Alternative B is 13,470 is justified. So, there mo na siyang table. So, sa capital, kaya dako kang nabayaran sa kuhan sa alternative D kay 415,000 sa alternative C kay 380 na. Pero sa kuhan by end of the year dako kag bayaran sa alternative C kay magkadako man yung bayad from 38 hangtod 40 40,100 while dito sa alternative D ay constant siya 27,400 so kan mas maka-benefit pa ka sa kuan sa alternative D kay constant naman di man magkadako so mo nang total na tanan kay kuan sa alternative D kay kuan ay mong total mabayaran by the end of 3 years 463,607 while sa alternative C kay 477,077 so mas justified yun nga dako kag mabayaran kay kuan man gamay ram kag mabayaran ay kakinalasan sa kuan bala nagdako kinabayaran kapital so mga siya guys scan lang ninyo if maglibog mo so next slide please. So, ensuring a comparable basis. So, each feasible, mutually exclusive alternative selected for detailed analysis meets the functional requirements established for the engineering project. Difference among the alternatives, however, may occur in different forms. Ensuring a comparable basis for their analysis requires that any economic impacts of this difference be included in the estimated cash flows for alternatives, as well as comparing them over the analysis period of time. Otherwise, the wrong decision alternative must be selected in implementing the project. So the following examples are the difference that may occur. So there, makita niyo ang mga difference sa kanang one line alternatives. So the first one is operational performance factors such as output capacity, speed, thrust, heat dissipation rate, reliability, fuel efficiency, setup time, so on. Number two is quality factors such as number of non-defective units produced per period or percentage of defective units reject rate. Number three is useful life, capital investment required, revenue changes, various annual expense or cost savings and so on. So, mo na siya mga different sa kanang alternative. So, kana daghan pa kay na pero gamay ang tagubat na kay kanon momento na sa buhok niya on ayun na well okay, so next slide please so two rules were given for facilitating the correct analysis comparison of mutually exclusive alternatives when the time value of money is not a factor in economic studies is not factor so for convenience these are the rules repeated extended for the account for time value of money so rule one mga siya rules. So rule one, when revenues and other economic benefits are present and vary among alternatives, choose the alternative that maximizes overall profitability. That is to select the alternative that has the greatest positive equivalent worth of minimum attractive rate and satisfies all project requirements. Rule two is when the revenues and other economic benefits are not present or are constant among alternatives. Consider only the cost alternative that minimizes the total cost. And that is to select the alternative that has the least negative equivalent worth of minimum rate attractive return and satisfies all the project requirements. So in simple terms, rule one is if the revenues or kanang imong madawatan is kanang laylay siya vary among options di siya pareho per alternative then imong piliyon na kay adto ka sa kanang highest profit or dako kag mga benepisyo mo na sa boss rule 1 ya sa rule 2 if the revenues are constant or not present if same ra siya imong madawatan sa lain-lain alternative 10K ra tanan sa lain alternative then focus ka tong gamay ka mabayaran so maano siya so next slide please. So study analysis period. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So study analysis period. So study analysis period, sometimes called planning horizon, is the selected time period over which mutually exclusive alternatives are compared. The determination of the study period for the decision situation may be influenced by several factors. For example, the service period, the useful life of short-lived alternative, the useful life of longer lived alternative, and company policy. So the key point is to select the study period which is most appropriate under the situation investigation. So useful lives of alternatives being compared relative to the selected study period can involve two situations. So these are the two situations. So the first one is useful lives are the same for all alternatives and equal to the study period. And the second one is useful lives are unequal among alternatives and have at least one that does not match the study period. So note Renee, so useful lives among alternatives somewhat complicate their analysis and comparison. To conduct an engineering economy analysis in such cases, we adopt the rule by comparing mutually exclusive alternatives over the same period of time. So, magana siya kay ang gamit ana kay assumption ko terminated. So, explain na lang siya next slide para sa ano one sa next slide please. So, mo ni siya ang katong gamit katong two situations ganina mo ng assumptions ang gamit. So, the two assumptions are repeatability and coterminated assumptions. So, repeatability assumption involves two main conditions. The study period over which alternatives are being compared is either indefinitely long or equal to a common multiple of lives of the alternatives. The second one is economic consequences that are estimated to happen in an alternative's initial useful lifespan will also happen in a succeeding lifespan. So, sabutan na sa kanang first condition kay one, if ang study period kay kuhan siya ng dugay kasi mga man or long lasting. Ya kanang second condition kay more like kanang ang study kay sa initial to succeeding nga studies kay same ra siya og kuan estimate or kanang gamay ra siya difference. So, mo siya sabot na. So, actual actual situations in engineering practice rarely be rarely meet both conditions. So this has tended to limit the use of repeatability assumption, except in those situations where the difference between the actual work of the first cycle and the actual work over more than one life cycle of the asset is involved is quite small. So nang parang explain kaya ng repeatability ay more than like repeating or siya if repeating ang economic consequences ang alternative mo siya repeating mo siya yung pangalan. Next is coterminated. So coterminated assumption uses a finite and identical study period for all alternatives. This planning horizon, combined with appropriate adjustment to the estimated cash flows, puts the alternative on a common and comparable basis. For example, if the situation involves providing a service, the same period requirement applies to each alternative in the comparison. The forced unmatched and cash flow durations to the determination time adjustment based on additional assumptions are made to the cash flows estimates of project alternatives having useful lives different from the study period. For example, if the alternative has a useful life shorter than the study period, the estimated annual cost of contracting for the activities involved might be assumed and used during the remaining years. Similarly, if the useful life of an alternative is longer than the study period, our estimated market value is normally used as a terminal cash flows at the flow end of the project's co-terminate life. So sa co-terminated kay more on like every alternative kay kanang giset tan siya same study period time niya. Ikaw na lang mag-adjust sa cash flows if na-line yung variable mahitabo sa mga projects. So, in simple terms, repeatability assumes all the alternatives will be keep repeating at the same consequences. So, kana mo itong ganina nga mag-repeat ka ng mag-repeat yung mga nagamit sa kanang repeatability. Mag-repeat ang kanang mga alternatives sa lifespan nila. While coterminated assumes that we're comparing them over a fixed period of time and adjust their cash flows accordingly. So, mato siya, same period draw per alternative, same study period draw kan per alternative niya. Ikala na just adjust sa cash flows. So, more to for my report and kan I kan Brian na report. Thank you.
Ako ang good. So, ang next kay 6.4, the useful lives are equal to the study period. So next slide, please. Useful lives are equal to the study period. It means that when its useful life of an alternative is equal to the selected study period. So adjustments to the cash flows are not required. In this section, we discuss the comparison of mutually exclusive alternatives using equivalent worth methods and rate of return methods when the useful lives of all alternatives are equal to the study period. In Chapter 5, itong report paglast, we learned that the equivalent worth methods convert all relevant cash flows into equivalent present, annual, or future amounts. When these methods are used, consistency of alternative selection results from this equivalency relationship. Also, the economic ranking of mutually exclusive alternatives will be the same when using the three methods. Consider the general case of two alternatives A and B. If the present worth A is lesser than the present worth B, then the future worth and annual worth analysis will result in the same preference for alternative B. So, and para magamit ni ang itong equivalent word method, the most straightforward technique for comparing mutually exclusive alternatives when all useful lives are equal to the study period is to determine the equivalent worth of alternative based on total investment at I is equal to the minimum attractive re- return rate. Then for investment alternatives, the one with the greatest positive equivalent worth is selected. And in the case of cost alternatives, the one with the least negative equivalent worth is selected. So sa pagpili sa atong mga alternatives kay pilion na to ang most positive. So ang kung atong sa ginansya pa ang pinakadako nga ginansya atong pilion diya. So nya sa cost kay katong pinaka-least nga alternative atong pilion. So to summarize, the most positive nga nga worth atong pilion. So next slide. The example of an analyzing investment alternatives by using equivalent worth. So Best Flight Incorporated is considering three mutually exclusive alternatives for implementing an automated passenger check-in counter at its hub airport. Each alternative meets the same service requirements but differences in capital investment amounts and benefits exist among them. The study period is 10 years and the useful lives of all three alternatives are also 10 years. Market values of all alternatives are assumed to be zero at the end of their useful lives if the airline's minimum effective rate of return is 10% per year. Which alternatives should be selected in view of the cash flow diagrams shown on page 254. So, kani morning solution by the present worth method. Gi-discuss na ni pagla sa group 2 ata. Yeah. So, sayo na ni parangan niya. So, kaning kuan man to ang present worth. Present worth is equal to the present worth of cash inflows minus present worth of cash outflows. So, dapat i-convert na to tanan sila sa present worth, then ang inflow minusan na to sa outflow. So diri ang atong inflow kay 69 $69,000 mao ni ang atong annual. So annual man siya ato sa i-convert to present. So atong solution atong gi-discuss pagla sa group to. So mao na siya no, kanang giso yang kanang negative $390 kay mao na ang atong capital investment nato ang atong outflow. So kana i-solve na siya mao na manggawas ang 33K, 106K, 160K. So based on the present worth method, alternative C would be selected because it has the largest present worth value of $160,000. The order of preference is C, B, A, where C is greater than B means C is prepared to B. Katong ang giingon kanina nga the most positive ang atong pilyon. So the most positive but si present worth si so mao siya atong dipili. So next slide please. So mao ni ang atong kuan yang timeline kaning 390k, 920k ug 660k mao ni ang atong kuan atong capital investment mao ni ang atong flow. Then kanang mga arrow sa babaw mao nga ang atong mga annual revenue kanang 16k, 167k or 133k. So wala ta atong kuan atong salvage value ata atong kanang sa kinalasan sa iyang lahat kay we assume naman sa problem the value of the equipment is zero na at the end of its lifetime. So next, so solution by the annual worth method. So same ra gyapon ang annual worth method ay ang annual worth method is equal to the R tong katong annual revenue o minus the expenses minus tong CR. Dire kay duha na lang atong value kay wala na ta atong expenses katong annual expenses kay pan kaning katong sa babaw kay net annual revenue naman to siya katong mga araw pababaw. So same ra gyapon ang i-minus to ang atong outflow sa atong inflow. So ang atong outflow ni kaning si katong kaning mga negative 390, negative 920, negative 660. Then kana kay present man na siya nga present value man na siya ato sa convert to annual katong solusyon na po sa gi-discuss pag last. Then i-plus tong atong annual revenue. So annual naman siya daan. So dili na nato siya i-convert. Ano siya guys? Yang mga results diya. So makita na to ang pinakadako kay ang C. So alternative C again is chosen because it has the largest annual worth value of 26k. So next. Solution by the future worth method. Kani same siya sa present worth pero future siya. So kato pan gyapon ang future worth of cash inflow minus the future worth of cash outflow. So ang atong outflow na po ang outflow gyapon nato kay kani negative 390, negative 920 ang atong mga capital investment. Then i-add to na atong mga annual revenue. Kay annual man siya i-convert na to siya sa future. So annual to future niya atong solution sa gidiscuss sa group to. So based on the future worth method, the choice is again alternative C because it has the largest future worth value of 415k. For all three methods in this example, notice that C is preferable than B and B is preferable than A. So because of the equivalency relationship among the methods, also notice that rule 1 katong gisulti ni Mario nga pinakadako ang atong pilion kay dako man. Para mas dako atong ginansya. So next please. Here another example analyzing cost only alternatives using equivalent work. So cost kani siya so ang meaning sa cost only kay outflow lang tanan. So a company is planning to install a new automated plastic molding press for different presses four different processes are available. The initial capital investment and annual expenses for the four mutually exclusive alternatives are as follows. So, muna siya guys, ang capital investment na to, kana, kay outflow gyapon na siya, niya ang useful life ka more plus kay 5 years and ang atong mm, atong study period kay 5 years sa equal siya. Yeah. Money annual expenses. So expenses na sila tanan dira ana as kay cost only alternatives man. So assume that each press has the same output of 120k units per year and has no value of at the end of its useful life. The selected analysis period is 5 years and any additional capital investment is expected to earn least 10% per year. So next please. So kanay mo na iyang mga timeline. So which price should be chosen if 120,000 non-defective units per year are produced by each press each press and all units can be sold. The selling price is $0.37 per unit sold by hand. So kini guys, so katong ma-produce sa mga press nga 120k units kay ma-solve siya og $0.375. So kani since the same number of non-defective units per year will be produced and sold each year, each press revenue can be disregarded. The end of the year cash flow in terms of the four presses are. So, mo na siya guys. Parang makita na to ang padong ang mga araw kat padong siya ubos tanan kay cost naman siya cost only alternative man lang pangita rin yung hatag sa problem kay mga cost ra mga expenses ra. So this ano, the preferred alternative will be minimize the equivalent worth of total cost over the 5-year analysis period. Katong gingon ni Mario ganin na katong rule 2 itong pinaka-list nga cost ang atong piliyon. Katusan kay ang list na cost kay mo man siyang most positive. So that is the four alternatives can be compared as cost alternatives. So pareha ra gyapon katong last example the present worth, annual worth, o future worth. So, kanay ang sample solve ang alternatives 1. So, kanay 24K mo ni ang atong out, outflow nga, outflow mo rin tanan day. So, i-add na to tanan atong outflow. So, kanay negative 24. Mo ni ang capital investment niya ang kaning negative 31K kay mo ni ang atong annual cost. So, annual mo siya ato siya i-present. Ang solution na sa to na niya ang annual worth. So, minus siya po ng i-add siya po nila mga negative 10 ng 24, ng 24K kay present mo na siya. So, i-convert to annual. Pana negative 37 yung answer niya. Ang future worth kay kani ang 24K na sad nga capital investment ang atong i-convert to future from present. So kana niya ang negative 31 sad ato sad siya i-convert to future kay annual man siya. So kana guys. So next. So kato guys kay katong gamiton dito na to ang atong present worth method, annual worth method, o future worth method. So kanang ubos nga table mo na iyang mga answer kung atong i-solve to. So the present worth method and annual worth method and future worth method values for alternatives 2, 3, and 4 are determined which similar calculations are shown for all for four process. So same rata na ng solution atong upat dong. Alternative 4 minimizes all three equivalent worth values of total cost and is preferred alternative. The preference ranking is Alternative 4 is more prepared than 2, then 1, and then 3. So resulting from the analysis is the same for all three nila. So kato guys atong rule to ni Mario nga ang pinakagamay nga cost ang atong pilion niya, ang pinakagamay nga cost na kay sa alternative format, so kaning P4 or alternative 4 atong pilion. So next, so kani kay line as an example, but analyzing alternatives with different reject rates. So naano siya reject rates katong sa mga units nga ma-produce. So kato same ra gyapon sa example pag katong second example, but na lang jud sila reject rates. So consider the four plastic molding press of example, last example. Suppose that each press is still capable of producing 120K total units per year, but the estimated reject rate is different for each alternative. This means that the expected revenue will differ among the alternatives since only non-defective units can be sold. The data for the four presses are summarized below. The life of each press and the study period is 5 years. So, correct yapon. So, correct guys, certain same ra gyapon ang kanang capital investment of total annual expenses sa paglast pero may nadagdag na reject rate. So, sa alternative 1 kay sa 120K units nga ma-produce may 8.4 nga reject or defective nga unit nga sa alternative 2 kay 0.3, 2.6, and so on. So, if all non-defective units can be sold for for 0.375 per unit, which press should be chosen? So, next. So, in this example, each of the four alternative presses produces 120K units per year, but they have different estimated reject rates. Therefore, the number of non-defective output units produced and sold per year, as well as the annual revenues received by the company, varies among the alternatives. So, lain-lain ang iyang mga annual revenue kay lain-lain man sila og reject rate. So, but the annual expenses are assumed to be unaffected by the reject rates. In this situation, the preferred alternative will maximize overall profitability. That is, the four prices com- need to be compared as investment alternatives. The present worth method, annual worth method, and the future worth calculations for alternative four are given below. So, kani ang gisolve nga kaya ang alternative 4 na itong most preferred na alternative sa last example. So, kani i so kani sa present worth method kay minus yapon katong capital investment ang nakalahi lang kay kaning i-add to na to atong inflow niya atong inflow kay katong na reject rate na 0 point atong reject rate sa alternative 1 nga ay alternative 4 dahil nga 5.6%. So mao na siya nga so 1 atong 100% giminus sa nato sa 5.6% niya ang answer na nga 94.4% at i-multiply na to sa 120K para makuha na to ang 94.4% sa 120K. Ang kanang 94.4% kay mao na ang non-defective, so maura na ang masolve niya. I-multiply na to siya sa price per unit nga $0.375 niya. Minus gyapon katong sa annual expense na to. So, ang atong halin sa katong 94.4% kay minus na to siya sa atong annual expense kay annual man sa ning 120K. So, nya ikon ka niyang answer atong pag minus na to sa katong 94% sa 120K by the annual expense kay i-convert na nato siya to present, so annual to present niya mo na ang nasod 22K niya. Same Japan sa annual worth tong kani negative 52K gapon niya kay annual man siya ay present siya nga kuan, so ato siya i-convert to annual niya plus gapon plus the inflow. Inflow man ni siya ang kaning na katong 120K na to nga kuan. So same ra gyapon siya ang nakalay lang kay dili na nato siya i-convert to annual kay annual naman si kuan si annual revenue or annual expenses. So mo na siya ni 6 to 5K dollars then ang future worth na pod di mo gyapon si negative 52K from present i-convert nito siya to future worth then plus na pod sa inflow na pod katong 120K na sad katong 94.2% sa 120K 0 point i-multiply na to siya sa iyang price yung i-minus pod na to siya sa annual expense niya kay kaning at niya kaning kay kaning 120K kay annual lang ni siya annual man ni siya tanan diri so ato siya i-convert to future kay future worth na natong gipangita so so mo na answer na niya 35K. So the the present worth, annual worth, and future worth values of alternatives 2, and 3 are determined with a similar calculation. So, same lagi po na siya i-solve ka na katong alternative 1, 2, 3, ug 4. So, next slide. So, mo na siya. So, the preference rankings is so itong ganina no ang atong preference kay itong alternative 4 but because of the reject rates kay nilahi na so the preference ranking now is 2, 4, 3 o 1 so makita no to si 2 siya ang pinakadako og kanang ginansya so kay katong gingon nga pilion na to ang most positive nga alternative mo to sa guys mga to siya ang akong part sa report the equivalent worth methods. Next is Brian.
Next slide, please. So, rate. This is just a continuation for what Andy reported. So, rate of return methods. Annual return on investment is a popular metric of profitability in the United States. When using rate of return methods to evaluate mutually exclusive alternatives, the best alternative produces satisfactory functional results of the requires the minimum investment of capital. This is true unless a larger investment can be justified in terms of its incremental benefits and costs. Accordingly, these three guidelines are applicable to rate of return methods. So first is each increment of capital must justify itself by produce wait wait love. Okay. Each increment of capital must justify itself by producing a sufficient rate of return greater than or equal to MARR. So MARR is minimum attractive rate of return. So on that increment. So number two, compare a higher investment alternative against a lower investment alternative only when the latter is acceptable. The difference between the two alternatives is usually an investment alternative and permits the better one to be determined. Number three, select the alternative that requires the largest investment of capital as long as the incremental investment is justified by benefits that earn it at least the MARR. This maximizes equivalent worth on total investment at I equals MARR. So important thing, do not compare the IRRs of mutually exclusive alternatives against those of the other alternatives. Compare an IRR only against MARR in determining the acceptability of an alternative. Next slide, please. So the inconsistent ranking problem. So in the table, it shows the cash flows of A and B. So these are the capital investment and annual revenues less expenses. So it shows in A and B as the capital investment increases, the annual revenues less expenses also increases. So kung magkadako imong capital investment, dako sad si ang annual revenue less expenses. So it shows in the right side the difference between B and A. So gi-minus na siya. Asa ang dako. So ang 26,000 minus 22,000 mo na siyang 4,225. The useful life of each alternative and the study period is 4 years. Also assume that MER is 10% per year. So first check to see if the sum of positive cash flows exceeds the sum of negative cash flows. This is the case here. So the IRR and PW or the present worth is 10% of each alternative are calculated as shown in the table. So here, the alternative A and B, IRR, then the present worth is which is 10%. If at this point a choice were made based on maximizing the IRR of the total cash flow, alternative A would be selected. But based on maximizing the present worth of the total investment at I equals MARR, alternative B is preferred. Obviously, here we have an inconsistent ranking of the two manually exclusive investment alternatives. Next slide, please. So the fundamental rule that the incremental net cash flow B minus A plays in the comparison of two alternatives where B has the greater capital investment is based on the following relationship. So how to get the cash flow of B? So cash flow of B is equal to cash flow of A plus cash flow of the difference, which we have discussed earlier. So this is the diagram which illustrates the ranking error in studies using the IRR method. Next slide, please. The incremental investment analysis procedure. So there are two, which is first, arrange in rank order the feasible alternatives based on increasing capital investment. Number two, which consists of A and B. A, cost alternatives. The first alternative, least capital investment is the base. And B, investment alternatives. If the first alternative is acceptable, IRR is greater than or equal to MARR, P, present worth, future worth, or annual worth at MARR is greater than or equal to 0. Select at is a base if the first alternative is not acceptable. Choose the next alternative in order of increasing capital. Next slide, please. So this is what do you call this? Ano siya ang flow sa katong gi-discuss kanina. First, arrange rank order, then establish katong A and B, then select the next MEA, develop incremental, then kung yes siya, is this the last MEA? If yes, stop the MEA is the preferred alternative. If no, this MEA is the new current base, and then it goes back to the selection. Next slide, please. Investment alternatives. Suppose that we are analyzing the following six mutually exclusive alternatives for a small investment project using the IRR method. The useful life of each alternative is 10 years and the MARR is 10% per year. Also, net annual revenues less expenses vary among all alternatives. And Rule 1 section in the 6.2.2 applies. If the study period is 10 years and the market salvage values are zero, which alternative should be chosen? Notice that the alternatives have been rank order from low capital investment to high capital investment. So same rasad ni siya ganina sa table nga kung gipakita nimo nga ninyo nga magkadako ang capital investment, magkadako pud iyang annual revenues less expenses as shown in the table. So it has A to F. Next slide please. So this is the solution of that. For each of the feasible alternatives, the IR on the total cash flow can be computed by determining the interest rate at which the present worth, future worth, or annual worth equals zero. So, parehas na ni sa katong discuss earlier. By trial and error, we determined that this is 10.6%. In the same manner, the IRR of all the alternatives are computed and summarized. So, katong IRR sa katong table nga show earlier, mo ni ang ma-IRR ato sa A to F. And this is the solution above. Next slide, please. So, comparison of 5 acceptable investment alternatives using the IR method. So, this is based on the example 6.4. So, it shows the increment considered A to F, then capital investment, annual revenues less expenses, the IRR, which we saw ganina, the question is increment justified. So, diri sa A A to F man to ganina, so karon kay i-minus na siya katong difference. This pre-analysis of the feasibility of each alternative is not required by the incremental analysis procedure. It is useful, however, when analyzing a larger set of mutually exclusive alternatives. You can immediately eliminate non-feasible or non-profitable alternatives as well as identify the base alternative. So, ang answer gani mo dira is no. So, pwede rin mo siya i-eliminate since dili man ka makakuha og profit ana. So, yes. Next slide, please. Next is the cost-only alternatives. The estimated capital investment and the annual expenses based on 1,500 hours of operation per year for 4 alternative designs of a diesel-powered air compressor are shown, as well as the estimated market value for each design at the end of the common 5-year useful life. So, one of the designs must be selected for the compressor, and each design provides the same level of service on the basis of the information. So, here A, determine the preferred design alternative using the IRR method. B, show the present worth method, which I is equal to MARR using the incremental analysis procedure results in the same decision. So, kani the same ra gyapon to siya ganina. So, kani kay D1, D2, D3, D4. Same ra to siya sa A, B, C, o D. Observe that this example is a cost type situation with 4 mutually exclusive cost alternatives. The following solution demonstrate a useful incremental analysis in the next slide. Ay balik sa David. So the solution there is the first step is to arrange in rank order gihapon the 4 mutually exclusive cost alternatives on the basis of their increasing capital investment cost. So therefore, the order of the alternatives for incremental analysis is D1 here, D1, and then D4, D2, and D3. Since these are cost alternatives, the one of the least capital investment is D1, is the base alternative. Therefore, the base alternative will be preferred unless additional increments of capital investments can produce cost savings or what we call benefits that lead to a return equal to or greater than the MARR. The first incremental cash flow to be analyzed is that between the design D1 and D4. So, imo na siya i-minus D4 minus D1 since D4 is greater than D1. The results of this analysis and the subsequent differences between the cost alternatives are summarized in the next slide. And then the incremental investment analysis for the IR method is illustrated in the next slide also. So, please next slide. Representation of capital investment increments and IR on increments considered in selecting design 3. An example in the earlier example. So first, the incremental cash flows between the cost alternatives are in fact investment alternatives. Second, the first increment katotong minus D4 minus D1 is justified where IRR is equal to 20.5% is greater than MARR, which is 20%. And the present worth is 20% equals $243 is equal to the increment of i-minus na pud ang katon D2 o D4 since D2 is greater than D4. So, dili man siya justified, no ang answer. And the last increment, i-minus gyapon ang D3 minus D4, not D3 minus D2 because design D2 has already been shown be unacceptable. So, dili man siya unacceptable and these are justified. So, i-eliminate na to siya nimo, resulting in the selection of design D3 for the air compressor. It is the highest investment for which each increment of investment capital is justified from the user's perspective. The third one is the same capital investment decision results from the IRR method and the present worth method using the incremental analysis procedure because when the equivalent worth of an investment at I equals MARR is greater than 0, its IRR is greater than MARR from the definition which I read in the previous slide. So next slide please. In- incremental analysis using ERR. In an automotive parts plant, an engineering team is analyzing an improvement project to increase the productivity of a flexible manufacturing center. The estimated net cash flows for three feasible alternatives being compared are shown in the table 6.5. The analysis period is 6 years and the MARR for capital investments at the plant is 20% per year. So ang MARR niya is 20% per year. Using the ERR method, which alternative should be selected? So ERR is equal to MARR. Solution, the procedure for using the ERR method to compare mutually exclusive alternatives is the same for the IRR method. So it is quite familiar that it is same for the IRR how we get the ERR. The only difference is in the calculations methodology. Next. So comparison of three mutually exclusive alternatives using the ERR method. So here in the table, it shows the alternative cash flows and the incremental analysis of alternatives. Katulad ng minus sana to sa right side. Ang kaning left side kay wala pa. End of period A to C. Yeah. It has 7 variables, 0 to 6. So motto, same magyapon sa akong gisulti ganina and then naana lang siya present worth of negative cash flow amount. So katong mga present worth kay mo siya og negative na future worth of positive cash flows amount. So ang future worth kay mga positive. So ARR so is increment justified. So same ra gyapon siya kung yes siya kay apil na siya sa pagkuan sa imong business and then kung no gani kay i-eliminate ra gyapon siya. The net cash flows for alternative A, which is the incremental cash flow between making no change or $0 kanang constant ra gyapon siya and implementing alternative A. So next slide please. So here is the solution for the ARR in the table. Same ra gyapon siya sa katong gi-discuss ni Andrew. So familiar gyapon mo. So using MARR, which is given in the problem, mga katong 20% per year, the capital investment is justified and the alternative A is an acceptable base alternative by using similar calculation. So, mamtong ingon nga, the same rang pag-solve sa ERR, IRR, pero ang naka-liner nila kay ang methodology. The increment B minus A earning 14.3% is not justified and the increment C minus A earning 27.1% is justified. So, piliin yun yung mga mas dako. Therefore, the alternative C is the preferred alternative for the improvement project. So, next slide, please.
So, sunod na part sa atong reporting guys. So, 6.5 useful lives are unequal among alternatives. So, when the useful lives of mutually exclusive alternatives are unequal, the repeatability assumption may be used in their comparison if the study period can be infinite in length or a common multiple of the useful lives. This assumes that the economic estimates for an alternative's initial useful life cycle will be repeated in all subsequent replacement cycles. As we discussed in section 6.3, this condition is more robust for practical application than it may appear. Another viewpoint is to consider the repeatability assumption as a modeling convenience for the purpose of making a current decision. When this assumption is applicable to a decision situation, it simplifies comparison of the mutually exclusive alternatives. If the repeatability assumption is not applicable to a decision situation, then an appropriate study period needs to be selected or co-terminated assumption. This is the approach most frequently used in engineering practice because product life cycles are becoming shorter. Often, one or more of the useful lives will be shorter or longer than the selected study period. When this is the case, cash flow adjustments based on additional assumption need to be used so that all the alternatives are compared over the same study period. So, the following guidelines apply to this situation. Useful life is less than the study period. So, cost alternatives, because each cost alternatives has to provide the same level of service over the study period, contracting for the service or leasing the needed equipment for the remaining years may be appropriate. Another potential course of action is to repeat part of the useful life of the original alternative and then use an estimated market value to truncate it at the end of the study period. P. Investment alternatives. The first assumption is that all cash flows will be reinvested in other opportunities available to the firm at the MARR to the end of the study. A second assumption involves replacing the initial investment with another asset having possibly different cash flows over the remaining life. A convenient solution method is to calculate the future worth of each mutually exclusive alternative at the end of the study period. The present worth can also be used for investment alternatives since the future worth at the end of the study period, say n, of each alternative is its present worth times a common constant, where interest is equal to MARR. 2 is useful life is greater than the study period. The most common technique is to truncate the alternative at the end of the study period using an estimated market value. This assumes that the disposable assets will be sold at the end of the study period at that value. So the underlying principle, as discussed in section 6.3, is to compare the mutually exclusive alternatives being considered in a decision situation over the same study or analysis period. In this section, we will explain how to evaluate mutually exclusive alternatives having unequal useful lives. First, we consider equivalent worth methods for making comparisons of alternatives. Then we turn our attention to the use of rate of return method for performing the analysis. Next slide, please. Equivalent worth methods. When the useful lives of alternatives are not the same, the repeatability assumption is appropriate if the study period is infinite or very long in length, or a common multiple of the useful lives. Under this assumption, the cash flows for an alternative's initial life cycle will be repeated in all subsequent replacement cycles. Because this assumption is applicable in any decision situations, it is extremely useful and greatly simplifies the comparison of mutually exclusive alternatives. With repeatability, we will simply compute the annual worth of each alternative over its own useful life and recommend the one having the most economical value. Example, the alternative with the highest positive annual worth for investment alternatives and the alternative with the least negative annual worth for cost alternatives. So next slide, please. So in example 6.7 demonstrates the computational advantage of using the annual worth method instead of the present worth or future worth. When the repeatability assumption is applicable, example 6.8 illustrates the use of co-terminated assumption for the same set of alternatives when the selected study period is not a common multiple of the useful lives. Example 6.7. The following data have been with a small engineering product for which revenues as well as expenses are involved. They they have useful lives of 4 and 6 years respectively. If MARR is equal to 10% per year, show which alternative is more desirable by using equivalent worth methods treated by hand and by spreadsheet. Use the repeatability assumption. So makita diri guys ang mga values A and B, like capital investment, annual cash flows, useful life nilang duha, and market value at the end of the useful life. So, ang solution na kay the least common multiple of the useful lives of alternatives A and B is 12 years. Using the repeatability assumption in a 12-year study period, the first like replacement of alternative A would occur if at end of year 4, and the second would be at end of year 6. For alternative B, one like replacement would occur at end of year 6. This is illustrated in part 1 of figure 6. Next slide, please. So solution by the present worth method. The present worth or the future worth solution must be based on the total study period of 12 years. The present worth of the initial useful life cycle will be different than the present worth of subsequent replacement cycles. So diri solve na to ang present worth sa A and B. So i-plug lang na to ang ilang mga value sa formula. Then makuha ni na to ang duha ka value. So based on the present worth method, we would select alternative B since like stated giniha, piliyon na to ang mas dako. Mas better mo dyan ang mas dako. Next slide, please. So, three guys, mo na itong figures, itong ipakita ganiha sa katong gisolve na to. Mo ni ang 3 cycles of alternative A, ang 2 cycles of alternative B nga. Mo ni ang mga years nila 0 to 12, 0 to 12. Next slide, please. Solution by the annual worth method. The like replacement of asset assumes that the economic estimates for the initial useful life cycle will be repeated in each subsequent replacement cycle. Consequently, the annual worth will have the same value for each cycle, and for the study period, production is needed for 12 years. This is demonstrated in the next annual worth solution by calculating the annual worth of each alternative over the 12-year analysis period based on the previous present worth values and determining the annual worth of each alternative over one useful life cycle. Based on the previously calculated present worth values, the annual worth values are I mean $151 and $332 respectively. Next, the annual worth of each alternative is calculated over one useful life cycle. This confirms that both calculations for each alternative result in the same annual worth value, and we would again select alternative B because it has the larger value of $332. So in the next slide guys, kay makita na to ang ang spreadsheet solution. So ipakita ra diri ang katong mga gamiton nga functions para ma-solve tong gi-solve nato ganiha. So figure 6 then shows the spreadsheet solution for this example. End of year cash flows are computed for each alternative over the entire 12-year study period. For alternative A, the annual cash flow of $1,255 is combined with the necessary reinvestment cost of $3,500. At the end of each useful life cycle, a similar statement can be made for alternative B at the end of the first life cycle, and as was the case in the previous solution by hand, alternative B is selected because it has the larger present worth value. So next slide, please. Example 6.8. Useful lives not equal to the study period the terminated assumption. Suppose that example 6.7 is modified such that an analysis period of 6 years is used instead of 12 years, which was based on repeatability and least common multiple of the useful lives. Perhaps the responsible manager did not agree with the repeatability assumption and wanted a 6-year analysis period because it is the planning horizon used in the company for small investment projects. So the solution is an assumption used for an investment alternative when useful life is less than the study period is that all cash flows will be reinvested by the firm at the MARR until the end of the study period. This assumption applies to alternative A, which has a 4-year useful life, 2 years less than the study period, and it is illustrated in part 2 of figure 6.9. We use the future worth method to analyze this situation. So again, i-calculate na po na to ang future worth sa A and B. Right. Mo na itong makuha ng mga values, $847 and $2,561. Based on the future worth of each alternative at the end of the 6-year study period, we would select alternative B since it has the larger value of $2,561. In the solution to example 6.7, it was shown and the repeatability is assumed. The annual worth of an alternative over a single life cycle is equal to the annual worth of the alternative over the entire study period. As a result, we can adopt the following rule to simplify the analysis of alternatives with unequal lives with a repeatability assumption when the repeatability assumption is applicable. When the repeatability assumption is applied, simply compare the annual worth amounts of each alternative over its own useful life and select the alternative that maximizes the annual worth. So the capitalized worth or CW method was introduced in chapter 5 as a special variation of the present worth method when revenues and expenses occur over an infinite length of time. Capitalized worth is a convenient basis for comparing mutually exclusive alternatives when the period of needed service is indefinitely long and the repeatability assumption is applicable. So next slide, please. So next example, comparing alternatives using capitalized worth. We now revisit the problem posed at the beginning of the chapter involving two containment alternatives for coal combustion byproducts. Because an indefinitely long study period is specified, we use the capitalized worth method to compare the two storage methods. First, we compute the annual worth of each system over its useful life, and then determine the capitalized worth, refer to section 5 point, so sa last chapter, over a very long study period. So mo na lang wet and dry nga mga calculations sa annual worth o sa capitalized worth. We recommend the wet slurry storage method because it has the lesser negative capitalized worth. So, di mas kuan man diri ang value niya. So, ang wet atong pilion. So, next slide please. So, the next example demonstrates how to deal with situation in which multiple machines are required to satisfy a fixed annual demand for a product or service. Such problems can be solved by using Rule 2 and the repeatability assumption. Annual worth and repeatability. Perfect. Yeah, they're perfect and all. Three products will be manufactured in a new facility at the Apex Manufacturing Company. They each require an identical manufacturing operation but different production times on a broaching machine. Two alternative types of broaching machines, Machine 1 and Machine 2, are being considered for purchase. One machine type must be selected. For the same level of annual demand three for the three products, annual production requirements and annual operating expenses are listed next. Which machine should be selected if the MARR is 20% per year? Solve by hand in by spreadsheet. Show all your solution to support your recommendation. So, money ang value sa problem. So, product ABC, money ang mga cost nga kinahanglan niya. Og total per hour. So, the assumptions are the facility will operate 2,000 hours per year. Machine availability is 90% for machine 1 and 80% for machine 2. The yield of machine 1 is 95% and the yield of machine 2 is 90%. Annual operating expenses are based on an assumed operation of 2,000 hours per year, and workers are paid during any idle time of machine 1 or machine 2. Market values of both machines are negligible. So, in the next slide guys, kay pakita na dira ang solution. So, solution by hand. The company will need 5,850 hours divided by 2,000 hours times 0.90 and 0.95. So, ang equal na niya kay 3.42 for machine 1 and for machine 2 kay 2.92. The maximum operation time of 2,000 hours per year in the denominator must be multiplied by the availability of each machine and the yield of each machine as indicated. The annual cost of ownership, assuming MARR, is 20% per year, is 20,064 for machine 1 and 17,200 for machine 2. There is an capacity when 4 machine M1s and 3 machine M2s are used to provide the machine hours just given. If we assume that the operator is paid for the idle time he or she may experience on machine 1 or machine 2, the annual expense for the operation of 4 M1s is 4 machines times $4,000 per machine. So, ang total na kay 16,000. And for 3 machine 2s, the annual expense is $18,000. The total equivalent annual cost for 4 machine 1s is 20,064 plus 16,000, which is 36,064. Similarly, the total equivalent annual expenses for 3 machine 2s would be 35,200. By a slim margin, machine 2 is the preferred choice to minimize equivalent annual cost for the repeatability assumption. So next slide, guys, kato ng spreadsheet solution. So next slide, please. So the
Hapit na siya maman, guys. Hello? Or continue. Hapit na siya maman.
hapit gamay na lang ko uwang sir mga
Okay. So, continue lang ta next meeting, guys. Okay, time naman.
sige,
Okay?
sige sir.
Sige, sige. So, we'll just continue next meeting, guys, for the discussion. Okay? Hopefully, you learned today for the topic or from the report. And see you next meeting. Okay. Thank you, guys. Goodbye.
May question, sir ba?
Yes.
Pwede ma-extend to ang kuan sir, ang requirement sa IoT.
Kano sa aman?
Karon na deadline na to sir, no?
Dili, next week pa.
Next week pa. Okay, sir.
Ah,
Sa
ini
sa to
ka
sir, no?
11. Ini ka 11. Ini face to face na to ni Monday.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, sige. Kuhaan ako, mag-create niya ako sa annex para sa kuhaan, schedule. Ang start schedule, okay? So, thank you so much, guys. And class dismiss. Okay. Bye,
Thank you, sir.
guys.
Good lesson.
Sir, thank you.